We're going to kick off a very full afternoon that will then go into our breakout session, so a lot to be excited about. So I'm thrilled to be here with a good friend of mine, Loung Ung, who is a treasure of Cleveland. And I want to introduce my friend just real quickly, and then we're going to jump into a conversation just on some points from her life and her experience. So Loung is a best-selling author, activist, and co-screenwriter of the 2017 Netflix original movie, First They Killed My Father, directed by Angelina Jolie. This was based on her, and I hope some of you have seen this, and I would, if you're, sign up for Netflix, I highly recommend it. It's now streaming in 190 different countries across the world, which is a real testament to the power of this story and the power of this woman sitting here with me. Loung Ung was only 5 years old when the Khmer Rouge soldiers stormed her native city of Phnom Penh. 4 years later, in one of the bloodiest episodes of the 20th century, some 2 million Cambodians, out of a population of 7 million, had died at the hands of the infamous Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge regime. Among the victims were Loung's parents, 2 sisters, and 20 other relatives. In 1980, Loung, her older brother Mang, and his wife escaped by boat to Thailand, where they spent 5 months in a refugee camp before relocating to the United States in Vermont. Since 1995, Loung has made over 30 trips back to Cambodia and has devoted herself to helping her native land heal from the traumas of war. She has worked as an activist to end violence against women, child soldiers, and the Campaign for a Landmine-Free World, serving as its spokesperson from 1997 to 2005. Before leaving to focus on her writing and becoming a restaurateur. Today, Loung and her husband Mark co-own 3 restaurants, 2 microbreweries. I highly recommend, if those of you from outside of Cleveland, we are known for our restaurants and we are especially known for our craft beers. And if you're into that kind of thing, I highly recommend Market Garden, which is the beer that Loung co-owns. It will be available tomorrow at our reception as well. But if you're in Cleveland for a couple days, it's a great 6-pack to bring back for a holiday gift. So with that, I'd like to jump into to a bit of a conversation. So, the first thing that struck my mind is, we're all here, we're all in the industry of refugee resettlement, and I think our contemporary idea of refugee resettlement really started with the Vietnamese and Cambodian resettlement to the U.S. And I would just like to start first, if you could think back as a child, as seeing that system and going through that system, what are some of the memories you have? What are some of the images that stay with you? And now looking back, what perceptions do you have of that?
Can you hear me okay? Fabulous. No? No? Can we, are you hearing me now? ជំរាបសួរ 1 2 3 4 5 ទាំងអស់គ្នា Loung? Now we're good? Oh, great. Thank you so much. I just want to say welcome to everybody to Cleveland. I came here in 2002 and it's been my home since, and really it's a wonderful city. As was Vermont when I first arrived in America as a 10-year-old kid, after having gone through 4 years of Khmer Rouge genocide and didn't know any English, didn't have any friends, and just came with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and it was, when we were at the refugee camps, I remembered not knowing, this would be pre-internet, not knowing anything about America. And the refugee workers would try to teach us about America by showing us movies on big screen. And on the big screens, the movie had plot lines that took, that was in places like Chicago, New York City, maybe Cleveland. And then we looked at on the screen and seeing all these people with diverse hair colors and skin colors in their short shorts on rollerblades carrying boom boxes, moving in and out of big city buildings. And we're like, yes, America. And then they told us we were going to this place called Vermont, America, which is statistically still the whitest state in America. For more diversity, I eventually moved to Maine, America. The second whitest state in America. But when we were sponsored by the USSC and specifically the Holy Family Church, my brother, my sister-in-law, and myself were among one of the 2 family members. The other Cambodian family was a family of 7, and so the 10 of us were the first 2 families to arrive in Vermont in 1980 in June, and we got off the plane and we thought we were freezing. And then they told us there was this thing called winter. We didn't know anything about winter. And when it came, we all started learning the 4-letter words. So it was not anything we could imagine. So there was a program called Spectrum that assisted us with applications for social welfares, for other kind of services. But we were greatly assisted by the parishioners of the Holy Family Church who supported us and helped us acclimate to all the day-to-day life skills that we needed, from grocery shopping in a grocery store. In Cambodia, you pick and smell everything, you squeeze everything, you taste everything. In America, you cannot barter in the grocery store, and they do not want you to squeeze things. And then when we went to the shelves to buy rice, they have these tiny little bags that were maybe a pound or 2. We need our rice, and we buy our rice from 75-pound bags. Right. And so there were all these things that for us was so different. And because we were the first 2 families in Vermont, it was a lonely experience for me. There wasn't a community there. We didn't know people. We didn't have we didn't have a car, so we couldn't get to Boston, where there was a larger community. With that said, I think when we came to America, we weren't greeted or welcomed in to communities where there was, today I think, so much fear and hatred and anger against newly arrived immigrants and refugees. There was racism, yes. There was maybe resentment, yes. And there were maybe confusion, but I didn't feel, I wasn't fearful for my presence in America. And I think this has changed with, our leader. We'll leave that for the off-topic conversations, and also the 24/7 news cycles. But I really think this has been a great change in what's going on now in America.
So kind of to follow up with that, you and I have talked a couple times in the past about the individuals that you met when you first arrived. And, I think we'd all, like to hear a little bit about some of those people that, that you met that provided help, provided services, support, some things that went right, and then maybe some things that didn't go quite right, or some things that could have been, some intentions that maybe were done from the good of the heart, but maybe were a little ill-informed.
Yes, yeah. Education is so important. Education for the refugees and newly arrived immigrants, of ourselves and our communities, and also education for our community members and our neighbors and our friends. When we came to the U.S., there was such a lack there of that type of education. We were welcomed by a group of wonderful parishioners from the Holy Family Church. They didn't know much about America. And I cannot believe that there wasn't, that it was seeming so I'm sure common sense to you, but that when we arrived in June and these well-intentioned, wonderful people wanted to share with us American culture and give us a great American experience. And so they took us on our first American outing to the 4th of July fireworks. Now, I had just spent 4 years in a genocide, and one of my most traumatic experience and memory of the genocide was of being in a bomb shelter with my best friend Pithy and my brother and sister Ju and Kim, and listening to bombs being projected and whizzing over our heads and counting under my breath for it to not hit us. And when it didn't, there was almost a real regret and fear because they're gonna keep on coming. And And then when the explosion hit our bomb shelter, and I reached for my friend Pithy, and instead of her head, I found a hole. And she was killed right next to me. Less than a year later, I was at the fairground where the group of Americans were eating their hot dogs and hamburgers and holding sparklers and talking about with great anticipation how excited and what a wonderful show it was going to be. And I couldn't understand when the fireworks went off while the Americans were applauding and were looking at the fireworks and not seeing the soldiers that had just crossed over from Cambodia to now stand next to us in America. I could not understood why they didn't pull that screaming baby away with them. And when I crawled underneath the bench and was trying to grab people and pull them under with me, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to stand and applaud the fireworks. And so I was very much re-traumatized and then came back out of that. And this was before people really understood what PTSD was all about. And then I went into therapy and I started writing and started keeping a journal. But this lack of understanding, the people, and I don't hold any ill will against the people who brought me, because they meant well. They just didn't know. And I'm so grateful that I was with my brother and with my sister-in-law, and we didn't speak English. And so we couldn't really explain to them what I was seeing in my head and what I was feeling in my heart, as opposed to what was being celebrated out there in the sky. So, that was, and we had experiences that, like, constantly. There was one time when I was talking with kids in school about how we weren't allowed to eat cereals at home, and we were fed rice 3 times a day, 6 days a week. And then somebody, and the kids actually told the parents and wanted to bring in DHS because I was being abused by not being allowed to eat all the sugar I wanted. We just don't eat that much sugar. And also, when we came to America, we were on welfare for 2 months. And back then, part of the food programs was that they delivered you milk, cheese, and then we promptly got sick. But we were still getting cartons of milk and cheese, which we gave to other people, but we really wanted rice. And that would have assisted us so much more than milk and cheese that we're lactose intolerant. So that did not help, but what helped was that we didn't have individuals who supported us. And I think we have to really change our mindset when we are working with newly arrived immigrants and refugees, that it's not a matter of what we are doing, what we ourselves individually are assisting, because really, what are we trying to do? We are trying to help people acclimate, yes. Help people and survivors go from surviving to thriving, yes. But what we're really doing, the end results of all we're doing is that we are wanting to help one human being become better citizens, better communities, better friends, better neighbors, to rebuild a community that we all could live together in. And to have a better future for all of us and our kids. And that means that when I volunteer, I also bring along my family members. I also speak to my nieces and nephews so that I am not doing this work alone. And I think when we had parishioners who assisted us, they didn't come alone. They came with families, with sons, with daughters. And as a result, we were able to better communicate and I think better grow together as a community.
Looking back, if you did have a magic wand to wave, what would you change, or what would you want to have done differently about when you arrived?
Yes, I think better education, trauma counseling, real understanding of traumas, also the differences between traumas experienced by girls versus boys. And we're all adults in this room, and when I went from some of the experiences, for us, traumas isn't something that you know when it's going to hit and when you're going to be triggered. And once I found out through my journey that loud noises, the kick of a car engine, the hums of a low roaring plane, the crying of a child, all these things that triggered me physically and emotionally, I really thought that was over. I didn't realize that the next point of my life, and one of the more traumatic experiences of my childhood, of the war, of what I suffered from the war, was a period when I changed from a girl to a woman. For all girls and boys, when your body goes through that kind of change, it also your mental health and also your psychological health changes with it. And no one, and I've already started writing, I've already had and seen my school therapist, but no one knew, and no one could tell me, and no one was aware that when I started seeing blood coming out of my body, I thought I was going to be dead or dying soon. The sight of blood. The last time I saw that kind of blood, it was of people dying in a war zone, and they were dead or dying. And for me, it was a time of really severe depression, which no one knew and didn't really understand, and I didn't understand. Because it wasn't just physical pain I was feeling in my body, in different parts of my body with the changes, but it was emotional pain. It was emotional pain that repeated itself on a monthly basis. And so I think for us working with refugees, especially war trauma survivors, we have to be very aware of the times in our lives when that person, and especially a young person, will be re-traumatized. And for a girl, it is often a time of puberty. So I think if I could somehow magically make people aware, it would be for people to understand the things that trigger us. And some of these things are they make sense. And they make sense because we all experience them as human beings. And for war survivors, that trauma is very real.
I kind of want to stay on that same topic about transition, right?
Yes.
And with I think a lot of us in this room, we work with clients, we work with people that are going through this massive transition in their lives, and a specific transition we see is with young people, right? So you were born abroad, you've moved here to a different country you never had any intention to move to. And now you're having to come to an identity or understand what your identity is in this new culture and place. How did you start to make sense of that, and when did that start to make sense to you? And yeah.
Yeah, again, I came to America in 1980, and I come from a family that was that really value education. And so my father and my brother and all of us, we came to America, and we were thankful for the generosity of the American people for helping us out. And we were going to work really hard to better our lives, and that was through education. And that was great, and I knew I could study, I knew I wanted to learn. It was made more difficult, and I didn't realize, I always knew I was different because I was practically one of the 2 brown girls in the school of all white kids. And yet, everywhere I went, even when I was trying to, for me, I knew who I was. Chinese, Cambodian, becoming an American. I grew up in a multicultural house where I learned to speak English and Cambodian fluently, and my family made sure, my brother and sister-in-law made sure that we speak these languages at home so that I'm fluent still today. And then we studied English, and I picked up French. And then we also grew up eating with spoons and chopsticks, so it was not very different from when you come from a multicultural house to add forks and knives to your placement set. So we were very good at acclimating that. And we also come from a culture where the Chinese word for marriage is the character of happy, 2 of them together. So a marriage literally translates into double happiness. And we didn't see integrating other principles and values into our lives as anything that was lacking, but more of an addition. With that said, everywhere I went, people would tell me I looked like Susie Wong. Or this is in Vermont. And Susie Wong in the movie The World According to Susie Wong was a kind-hearted, albeit prostitute, Asian prostitute. And then when the movie Four Metal Jackets came out, I would go to school and the kids would say, oh, boom, boom, yum, yum, $5 for a good time. There was just a line, again, uttered by prostitutes in the movies. And so that was really strange. That was I was very proud of who I was. My brother made sure that I was proud of my last name and that we had dignity and that we had principle and that we were ethical, hardworking people. And yet everybody else around us seemed to have more of an identity issues with us than we did with ourselves. And that really allowed me to learn that when I was struggling with the issue of identity, it wasn't me struggling with it. It was everybody else around me. So I had to make sure that I stand in my power, that I stand in my principle, that in my values. And so that allowed me to really make more sense of that and not care what other people thought.
So, as you were a writer, as you were an artist, at that time, were there certain stories, characters that helped you make sense of this, that helped you understand what this, how you were being perceived in a positive way?
I remember reading the book, Call It Sleep, by Henry Roth, about a Jewish family, told from the point of view of a Jewish 6-year-old boy in the 1930s and their immigrant experience in America, New York. And I remember just being, it was a beautiful story, but I was blown away by how the prose and the dialogues were written in the story. And in conversations, when the characters were having conversations with Native Americans, with American native speakers, their words were often truncated or cut or stunted or clunky. But when they spoke amongst themselves, in their communities and in their mind, the prose was just so beautiful and eloquent and elegant. And was the first time where I thought, that is how we see ourselves. That was how immigrants and refugees, that's how we see ourselves. In that other people tell us we speak broken English, but really in our mind and amongst ourselves, we're very eloquent. And that made me more aware of how people saw us. And it also taught me a ton of other things. But when I sit down to write, that's what I always try to imagine, is to make sure that we present ourselves the way we see ourselves and not how other people see us.
And do you see a connection from that understanding to how you decided to write your first book?
I did. I mean, I'm an avid reader. I love books. It was. I wanted to make sure that I wanted to honor my family, and then they were very graceful, dignified people, and so I had to use language like that. I also love the English language and the eloquence that we can put them together into words, and instead of all the different characters from the Chinese language. But it was different in that I started writing my book. I kept a journal. I've always kept a journal. I couldn't really speak my story, didn't know who to tell, and so I could always tell it to the pages. And there's also something about writing for me that when you're doing when you're writing, you are able to take everything in your head. And it's why it's really wonderful therapy. It's something I think we encourage refugees, once they start learning, is to have programs where they are taught to tell their stories onto the pages. Because when things happen to you, they happen to you and they follow you like this big clouds that thunders and shoot lightnings at you, and you can't make sense of it, and it's scary and it's dark. With your pen, you can poke it into the clouds and one by one pull out one single thread of a story that you can make sense, that you can name, that you can understand, and then you can put it down on paper, and then you have power over it and not it over you. And so that was what happened to me when I woke up on April 15th, 1998 to the news that Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge soldiers, had died. And the legacy of his story was broadcast in one of the last interviews he did, where he said everything he did for love. And the anger and the rage poured out of me at that time, and I thought, love does not a genocide make. Love does not commit mass murders. Love does not torture, hurt, and kill. Love does not pull children away from their parents. Love does not tear families apart. Love is something that unites. Love is something that heals. Love is something that is full of gratitude and joy. And so with my pen, I wanted to tell the story of love that takes place in the midst of war. And so it was with my story and my writing that I wanted to negate Pol Pot's legacy of love and made sure everybody saw it as mass murders and genocide.
Well,
thank you.
I feel very fortunate to be sitting here with you. Unfortunately, I know we are almost out of time, but is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Well, I wanted to be here mainly to say thank you. I mean, now I'm actually getting emotional. I want to say thank you for all the work you do. I want to say thank you because what you do matters. The work you do alter lives and change hearts and minds. The work you do help people go from surviving to thriving, to becoming productive citizens, to have dignity that they already possess, but to be able to carry it with pride. The work you do create a safer and better world for all of us, not just some of us. The work you do doesn't just help the people who are in need of it, but it helps you to become better human beings so that we could all go forward together. I am so grateful because people like many of you in this group were the same people who came into my life when I was young, who was there to walk me to school, to go trick-or-treating, who was there to taught me how to do laundry in a laundromat, who was there to tell me I could not take the copy of the Burlington Free Press because though press was free, you had to pay for the newspaper. And so all these small things that seem small to Americans was all new and big to us. And only by learning them and building friendships and communities could we actually thrive and make a better life for ourselves and become better contributing members of our community and in our new home. So I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure talking with you. It's always a great conversation.